The Pacific sky in 1943 was wide, blue, and full of shadows. For the men who fought in it, it was both freedom and prison, beauty and terror. Stories told decades later, around kitchen tables and in veterans' halls, still carried the weight of those skies. Among those stories was the rise of a machine, the Grumman F6F Hellcat, that would turn laughter into fear and doubt into victory. At first, the laughter came from Japanese pilots, confident and battle-hardened. They had the Zero, an aircraft that danced through the air with elegance, turning tighter, climbing faster, already feared since Pearl Harbor. For 2 years, the Zero was the symbol of Japanese dominance. Young pilots believed they were untouchable, and many in the American ranks quietly feared the same. When word spread that the Americans were building a new fighter called the Hellcat, some Japanese pilots mocked it. "Too heavy," they said. "Too slow." They laughed in their briefings, dismissing it as another clumsy piece of American steel that would fall before the precision of the Zero. But history is rarely written by laughter. In Long Island, New York, at the Grumman plant, men and women labored through the nights. They weren't pilots. They weren't strategists. They were ordinary factory hands, farm boys, housewives, immigrants, machinists, working with rivets and blueprints, dreaming of sons and brothers overseas. They built the Hellcat not out of pride, but out of necessity. Reports poured back from the Pacific. Pilots in Wildcats were being cut down at staggering rates. Something had to change. When the first Hellcats rolled onto carriers, pilots were skeptical. They ran their hands along the metal skin, noting its bulk. It didn't look like a dancer's plane. It looked like a brawler. But in the Pacific, brawlers sometimes survived where dancers fell. One of those pilots was Jack Monroe, a 21-year-old from Nebraska who had never seen the ocean until war sent him halfway across the world. Jack wrote to his mother the night before his first Hellcat mission, "It's not as pretty as the Zero, Ma. But I don't need pretty. I need to come home." The test would come soon enough. In the waters around the Gilbert Islands, a squadron of Hellcats rose to meet Japanese Zeros. The battle that followed was chaos in motion, machine guns rattling, engines screaming, tracers arcing across the sky. Jack found himself in a tight turn with a Zero behind him. He knew from his training that the Zero could outturn him, and fear clawed at his chest. But then he remembered something his instructor said: "Don't dance with a Zero. Fight like an American, straight, strong, fast." Jack pushed the throttle, climbing instead of turning. The Hellcat roared. The Zero followed, but its engine strained. Jack cut back, looped over, and in a burst of courage and fire, he squeezed the trigger. The Zero fell, smoke trailing like a broken ribbon. That day, dozens of Zeros were destroyed. The Japanese laughter faded. Word spread quickly in the Pacific. The Hellcat wasn't just another fighter. It was a predator. It took hits that would have shredded a Zero and kept flying. Its guns spat fury with accuracy. And more than anything, it gave young American pilots a chance to survive, to fight another day. But the story of the Hellcat wasn't just steel and gunpowder. It was about resilience, about learning that overconfidence can be a downfall. In Tokyo, some Japanese strategists warned their pilots not to underestimate the new American machine. Yet the culture of superiority, the belief that their skill was unmatched, blinded many. They kept flying their Zeros as though the war hadn't shifted. They laughed until the laughter died in their throats. Jack Monroe survived the war. He came home in 1945, older than his years, his eyes carrying both pride and grief. He never boasted of the kills he made. Instead, he talked about the men he lost, and about the lesson he carried: never mock the quiet worker. Never underestimate the one who looks slower, heavier, less graceful. Sometimes that's the one who changes everything. In a small town in Nebraska, he returned to farming, married his childhood sweetheart, and raised 3 children. But when the sky was clear and he heard the hum of a plane, he would stop, look up, and remember. His grandchildren would ask, "Grandpa, were you scared?" He always answered the same, "Yes. And being scared made me careful. Care kept me alive." Never laugh at fear. It teaches you to respect what you face. The Hellcat became a symbol not of glamour, but of grit. By war's end, it accounted for more than 3/4 of all aerial victories against Japan. It was not loved for beauty, but respected for results. The Japanese pilots who once mocked it came to dread its sight. For them, the lesson was bitter. Arrogance blinds, and laughter without respect is costly. For those who lived through it, the memory of the Hellcat was tied to survival. Veterans' reunions in the 1960s and 70s would often circle back to those days in the Pacific. Men with gray hair and lined faces would lean on canes, their voices breaking as they spoke of friends lost, of nights staring at the ceiling listening for phantom engines, of the strange silence after the guns stopped. They would toast to the Hellcat, to the workers back home, to the chance it gave them to return. In Australia, where families watched the Pacific War with fear in their hearts, stories of the Hellcat's victories brought relief. Towns along the coasts, once worried about Japanese expansion, breathed easier knowing the tide was turning. For Americans and Australians alike, the Hellcat became more than a machine. It was proof that determination and adaptation could overcome even the most daunting challenge. Decades later, a Hellcat sits in museums, polished and still. Tourists walk past, reading plaques, taking photos. Some see only a relic. But older visitors, especially those in their 60s and 70s, pause longer. They see not just rivets and paint, but the courage of youth, the sacrifices of a generation, and the eternal lesson: don't laugh too soon. When Jack's granddaughter visited a museum in Pensacola, she stood before a Hellcat and whispered her grandfather's words, "Respect the quiet worker." She didn't know the sound of battle, but she knew the value of humility, of patience, of resilience. That was the real inheritance, far beyond medals or records. The story of the Hellcat is not about one plane defeating another. It's about life itself. We all face Zeros, challenges that seem faster, sleeker, impossible to match. Sometimes people laugh at our attempts to rise, to build, to push forward. But if we stay steady, if we refuse to give up, if we trust the strength built into us, we can turn the tide. The Hellcat story is ours, underestimated, doubted, yet capable of sweeping aside the obstacles that once seemed invincible. And in that, there is a lesson for every generation. The skies change, the battles shift, but resilience never goes out of style. The laughter of the overconfident fades. What endures is the quiet determination of those who refuse to be broken. So when you hear the story of Japanese pilots laughing at the Hellcat, remember this: laughter can be loud, but silence after defeat is louder still. And sometimes, the very thing mocked is the thing that saves the day.